The world of Hollywood glitters on the outside, but behind the flashbulbs and the stage smiles lies a battlefield of betrayal, heartbreak, and silence. And nothing proves this more than the shocking fallout between Taylor Swift and Blake Lively. Once inseparable best friends, now torn apart by an engagement announcement that should have united them, but instead has ripped their bond to shreds with Travis Kelce. Entering the picture, Taylor's life is soaring into a fairy tale chapter, but for Blake, this moment of celebration has become a devastating spotlight, exposing cracks that have long been hidden. The silence, the shade the public snubs it all. Paints a picture more dramatic than any movie script, and fans are left gasping. Is this the final end of Hollywood's most envied friendship? The world is spinning faster than ever as Hollywood finds itself shaken by the storm that no one ever predicted. The engagement of Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce should have been a fairy tale moment celebrated across the globe. But instead, it has revealed the most dramatic and heartbreaking collapse of friendship the industry has seen in years. Blake Lively, once the shining star standing proudly at Taylor's side, once the so-called best friend who is treated like family, is now left in silence. A silence so loud that fans cannot stop whispering what really went wrong. How did a bond built on years of loyalty and staged smiles unravel into this eerie distance? And the more we look, the clearer it becomes that this was not a sudden break. This was a long, slow burn, a betrayal hidden in plain sight. Every sign ignored until the explosion became unavoidable. And now the evidence is everywhere, from the birthday snubs to the wedding guest list, exclusions to the quiet, calculated absence on social media. It is all a trail of daggers and shadows that prove Blake Lively and Taylor Swift are no longer allies. They are no longer sisters. They are no longer even neutral parties. They have become symbols of how toxic friendships crumble under the glare of fame. When Taylor announced her engagement to Travis Kelce, the internet erupted. Fans sobbed, screamed, and celebrated. But others noticed the silence, a silence that grew darker. With each passing hour, no message from Blake, no congratulatory post, no simple acknowledgement of one of the biggest milestones in her supposed best friend's life. And for Swifties, that silence was not neutral, it was hostile. It was a dagger wrapped in velvet, a deliberate refusal to stand with the woman who had once made her children godchildren, who had once included her in the most private of circles. And while some argued that maybe Blake wanted to keep things private, the reality soon came, crashing down as insiders revealed that tensions had been growing for years. The cracks had been widening behind the glamorous red carpet smiles, and when the engagement hit, it simply tore away the last pieces of the mask. Sources close to Taylor say the bitterness began when Taylor carefully planned the announcement of her engagement just one day after Blake's 38th birthday. And while some believed this was coincidental, others saw it as a pointed move, a calculated show that Taylor was done prioritizing the feelings of someone who had already drifted away. It was the clearest message she could send without saying a word, that she was moving forward into a new era, with Travis leaving behind the baggage of friendships that no longer served her. Yet Blake was not only absent from the engagement. Congratulations, she was reportedly excluded from Taylor's own birthday celebrations months earlier. Insiders whispered that Blake tried to spin the story, claiming she would not have invited Taylor to her own parties either. But the truth did not sit right with fans. It felt too defensive, too rehearsed, too desperate to control a narrative that was already slipping from her hands. Swifties saw right through it. They flooded social media, calling Blake manipulative, toxic, opportunistic, accusing her of using Taylor when it suited her to climb higher into the Hollywood elite, and then discarding her when loyalty became inconvenient. And if this was not enough to convince the world, the silence from Ryan Reynolds only deepened the mystery. Once the loudest cheerleader for his wife's best friend, he too has retreated from the spotlight, offering no support, no acknowledgement, and no defense of the woman who now faces the wrath of an entire fandom. It is as if the Reynolds-Lively household decided that silence was safer than standing in a war they could not win. But silence itself has become a weapon, and every day that passes without a word becomes another cut, another wound to a friendship already bleeding and broken. And then came the whispers about Travis Kelce himself, a man who seemed unlikely to ever interfere in Hollywood drama, but who now finds himself at the center of it because Blake Lively's distance is not just about Taylor. It is about the new power dynamic Travis has created. He has become the anchor in Taylor's life, the new loyalty, the new priority. And in his presence, old ties seem weaker, less necessary. Insiders have even suggested that Travis subtly influenced Taylor to cut ties with those who no longer proved loyal to her future, to her happiness, to her stability. And while that may sound ruthless, it is exactly the kind of decision Taylor Swift is known for. She does not hesitate when it comes to protecting her brand, her peace, her kingdom. And in this kingdom, there is no room for betrayal. The fallout has been devastating. Not just for Blake, but for the perception of her entire public image once adored. She is now painted as bitter, and cold fans dig up old interviews, old clips, old social media posts searching for clues of jealousy, for glimpses of cracks, for evidence that she was never truly genuine. And every little discovery becomes fuel for the fire narratives are spun that Blake always envied Taylor, always wanted the spotlight for herself, that her laughter was staged, her loyalty, conditional, her friendship, a performance designed for cameras and headlines. And the deeper fans dig, the uglier it looks. While Taylor glows in a new chapter of love, stability, and triumph, Blake is left with questions, shadows, and accusations. Even her marriage is pulled into the narrative as whispers grow that Ryan himself has grown weary of the drama that they picture. Perfect image is cracking under the weight of lost alliances and shifting loyalties, and through it all, Taylor remains silent. She does not need to defend herself. She does not need to clap back. Her power is in her silence. Her story is being told. Through actions, not words, through who she invites, through who she excludes, through who stands beside her on the most important day of her life. And Blake Lively will not be one of those people. This is no longer speculation, it is the cold sharp. Truth written in absence, written in silence, written in the eyes of fans who have seen too much to ignore. The mask has slipped, the friendship has died, and the fairy tale has become a nightmare for Blake Lively, who now faces the fallout of being on the wrong side of Hollywood's most powerful woman. And if history has taught us anything, it is that no one survives being cut off by Taylor Swift. The story only grows darker as the days pass, because what began as whispers of silence between Blake Lively and Taylor Swift has now become a full-scale public reckoning, and fans cannot look away. Every move, every absence, every quiet detail is magnified under the microscope of a fandom that refuses to be deceived. And what they are uncovering paints a picture of betrayal that stretches back further than anyone dared to imagine. Some even claim the seeds of this destruction were planted years ago, when Blake Lively first entered Taylor's inner circle, when she was welcomed like family, when her children were brought into the sacred fold of godchildren, a gesture that was meant to seal a lifelong bond, but now looks like a cruel reminder of what has been lost. Insiders whisper that tension started simmering when Blake began to resent the spotlight. Taylor commanded no matter how glamorous Blake looked on the red carpet. No matter how adored she was by Hollywood, she could never overshadow the presence of Taylor Swift, the global icon who stole headlines with a single post, and the envy. The quiet resentment began to grow like a shadow behind the smiles, the photos, the carefully curated friendship, and while the world believed their bond was unbreakable, cracks were forming like fault lines beneath a glittering city waiting for the quake to shatter everything. The engagement of Taylor to Travis Kelce was not the quake itself. It was the explosion that revealed the fault lines that had been building for years. Blake did not just go silent. She allegedly began to feed stories to the press. Subtle insinuations, crafted denials, hidden jabs that fans quickly detected as more than coincidence. Suddenly, blogs were filled with narratives painting Blake as the victim, painting Taylor as calculated, cold, strategic. But these narratives backfired. Instead of gaining sympathy, Blake was accused of orchestrating a smear campaign, of weaponizing the press to wage a shadow war against someone who once called her sister. The backlash was swift. Fans began dissecting timelines, analyzing every public interaction and finding patterns that pointed to years of jealousy, years of subtle digs, years of moments where Blake seemed to enjoy bringing the spotlight back to herself, even if it meant dimming Taylor's light. And the fury only grew when sources began revealing that Blake had privately mocked Travis Kelce long before the engagement announcement. She allegedly saw him as a temporary distraction, as someone beneath the status of a superstar like Taylor. But this arrogance only worsened the damage, because Travis was not temporary. He became permanent. He became the anchor, and when the engagement dropped, the world saw just how serious this bond had become. Suddenly, Blake was on the outside, and her words now looked like venom rather than humor. Even Hollywood insiders began to distance themselves from her, unwilling to side with someone who dared to cross the force of nature that is Taylor Swift. And yet the silence remains. Blake has offered no public statement, no defense, no attempt to repair the damage. Perhaps because she knows there is nothing she can say that will undo the avalanche that has already been set in motion. And this silence is now being read as guilt by the fandom who have made up their minds. Blake betrayed Taylor, and now she is paying the price. The domino effect has been brutal. Brand deals that once celebrated her association with Taylor now look awkward. Endorsements she once shared in overlapping circles are being reconsidered. Publicists scramble to reshape her image. But how do you reshape something that has already shattered? The comparisons are inevitable. When Taylor stands in stadiums with thousands screaming her name, and Blake is left with whispers and accusations circling around her. Reputation is no longer just about her career. It is about her loyalty, about her character, about the choices she made when she thought the world would not notice. And Ryan Reynolds is not immune either, because the silence from him has not shielded him. It has instead dragged him into the storm. Fans speculate about his role, about whether he supported his wife's distance from Taylor or whether he warned her that crossing such a powerful figure would backfire. Some even suggest their marriage is strained under the weight of these decisions, pointing to fewer appearances together, fewer signs of their once playful banter. And whether or not those whispers are true, perception has already taken hold. And in Hollywood, perception is everything. What makes this saga so compelling is the sheer power dynamic at play, because Taylor Swift is not just a friend. She is an empire. Her influence touches industries from music to fashion to politics, and anyone aligned against her is seen as aligning against her army of fans, her army of influence, her global reach. And Blake lively underestimated this. She underestimated the price of silence, the price of absence, the price of jealousy disguised as loyalty. Now her career, her image, and her friendships are all under siege, and the timing could not be worse. As Taylor ascends into yet another golden era with Travis. By her side, the contrast could not be starker. One woman glowing, thriving, untouchable. The other shrinking under shadows that only grow darker. The engagement celebration became the turning point, the moment the world realized this friendship was dead, not just dormant, not just distant, but gone, obliterated. And in that realization, the narrative of betrayal took root. And it is a narrative that Blake cannot shake, because every action she takes, now every appearance, every interview is filtered through the lens of suspicion and hostility. People do not ask about her projects anymore. They ask about her silence, about Taylor, about Travis, about the engagement that became a global spectacle. And her lack of presence in that spectacle became louder than any word she could ever speak. And what makes this truly devastating is that fans feel personally betrayed. They were sold the image of a friendship so pure, so powerful that it became part of the cultural fabric, and now to see it destroyed. To see Blake painted as the villain is like watching a fairy tale crumble into ashes. The fury is not just for Taylor. It is for themselves, for believing in something that was never real, for investing in a bond that has been exposed as transactional, manipulative, opportunistic, and in this fury, Blake is the target. She is the one they blame. She is the one they accuse. She is the one they drag through the fire, and the more she stays silent, the more the fire grows, consuming her image, her career, her legacy. And now the question is no longer whether she will recover. The question is whether she will ever be forgiven, or whether she will become a permanent cautionary tale of what happens when you turn against the most powerful woman in the world of entertainment. As the storm continues to rage around Blake Lively and the silence becomes heavier, the speculation only multiplies, because in the vacuum of her absence, the world begins to fill in the blanks with theories and rumors and narratives that grow darker. By the day, some claim that the silence is not strategy but fear. Fear of what Taylor Swift could unleash if pushed too far. Fear of the evidence, the receipts, the conversations that Taylor may hold back as ammunition, because if anyone knows how to control a narrative, it is Taylor Swift. And if anyone has the power to end a career with a single song, a single lyric, a single coded message, it is her. Fans know this, and they wait breathlessly for the moment. Taylor may choose to break her silence with an artistic strike that leaves no doubt about who betrayed her. But until that moment comes, the fans themselves act as soldiers, combing through archives of interviews and clips, highlighting every time Blake seemed to diminish Taylor, every time her laughter felt too sharp, her comments too dismissive. Her smile's too forced, and suddenly what once looked like casual banter looks like contempt. Hidden in plain sight, the internet becomes a courtroom, and Blake is the accused with millions of prosecutors building their case piece by piece. And in this court, there is no presumption of innocence. There is only rage, there is only betrayal, and the verdict is almost predetermined. But what makes it worse is the eerie quiet from Ryan Reynolds, whose charm and wit once made every situation disarmingly light, now seems cold, calculated, even complicit. Some believe he has chosen to protect his brand, his projects, his standing in Hollywood, rather than defending his wife, which only fuels the narrative that even he knows she crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. The question now is not only about friendship, it is about survival, because Hollywood thrives on alliances, and when one alliance shatters, others tremble. What director, what producer, what brand wants to attach themselves to a name dragged daily across the internet? What benefit is there in siding with someone who has been marked as the villain in the story of America's sweetheart? The imbalance of power could not be clearer. Taylor, with her stadium tours, with her billionaire status, with her army of loyalists, stands untouchable, while Blake is drowning in whispers and shadows, fighting battles that seem already lost, but still she does not speak. And the longer she remains in hiding, the more the public turns her into a ghost. A fading figure whose silence is interpreted not as strength but as surrender. And as she fades, Taylor only grows stronger, standing beside Travis Kelce, projecting a narrative of love, stability, and power that is the exact opposite of the chaos surrounding Blake. Insiders report that Blake feels abandoned, betrayed even by those she once supported, because doors are closing, opportunities are vanishing, and friends are choosing sides, and most are not choosing hers. The devastating part is that Blake may have believed her silence would protect her, that staying out of the storm would eventually allow it to pass. But the storm has only grown, the silence has become her prison, the absence her downfall. And as fans rage, her brand weakens, her power diminishes, and she becomes the very thing she once feared: irrelevant. But irrelevance is only part of the punishment, because what fans really want is not silence. They want confession. They want accountability. They want her to admit what they believe is true, that she envied Taylor, that she betrayed her, that she chose to mock rather than support. And until that moment comes, the anger will not fade. It will escalate. And if history has taught us anything, it is that public anger in the age of social media is relentless. It does not forget. It does not forgive. It feeds on itself and becomes a monster that consumes everything in its path. And right now, Blake is in its path. Every interview she ever gave, every photo, every public moment is being reanalyzed through the lens of betrayal, and the narrative tightens around her like chains. The tragedy is almost cinematic. The glamorous actress adored by millions brought down, not by scandalous acts, but by silence and shade, by the perception of betrayal in a friendship that was meant to symbolize loyalty and trust. It is Shakespearean in its scope: the rise, the fall, the betrayal, the downfall. And yet, it is all happening in real time, unfolding before millions who consume it not as tragedy, but as entertainment. Every headline, every tweet, every video adds to the spectacle, and Blake has no control left. She is a character in a play. She can no longer write the script. For and as Taylor thrives, the contrast becomes unbearable. The more joy Taylor projects, the more misery fans imagine for Blake, and this loop keeps the story alive. It feeds the machine. It ensures that Blake will never be able to outrun the shadow of this fallout, even if she one day speaks. The damage may already be permanent, because in Hollywood, perception is power, and her perception is poisoned beyond repair. But what if the silence hides something deeper? What if the whispers of a crumbling marriage are true? What if the tension between Ryan and Blake is not just speculation, but reality? This possibility adds fuel to the fire, because if her marriage falters alongside her friendship with Taylor, then her entire public image of perfection collapses, the brand of the Golden family. The Hollywood power couple disintegrates, and with it goes the last shield she may have had against the fury of the fandom. It is this possibility that keeps the world watching, that keeps the speculation alive, because people are not content with silence. They want the full collapse. They want the final act. They want to see how far Blake can fall, and whether she can ever rise again, but rise against what? Against Taylor, against the army, against the perception that has already locked her into the role of villain. It seems impossible, and yet the world waits. Because in Hollywood, the impossible often becomes reality. Scandals fade. Reputations are rebuilt. But can this one ever fade when it involves Taylor Swift, the most powerful cultural figure of the generation? This is the suspense that keeps audiences glued to the story. The idea that we are witnessing not just gossip but history, the destruction of an image, the unraveling of a career, the rewriting of a legacy. And as long as Blake remains silent, that suspense will not break, it will loop endlessly, trapping her in a narrative she cannot escape. And so we reach the end of this unfolding storm. Yet in truth, there is no end, only echoes. Because the silence of Blake Lively still thunders louder than any statement could. The friendship that once glowed as an emblem of loyalty now lies in ashes. And those ashes are scattered across every headline, every whisper, every digital corner. Of the internet, fans demand answers. They demand confession. They demand closure. But closure never comes instead. The silence grows heavier. It bends perception. It hardens anger, and it cements a narrative that feels irreversible. Taylor Swift shines, brighter than ever. Hand in hand with Travis Kelce, conquering stadiums, reshaping culture, commanding an empire. While Blake is left with shadows, with speculation, with the relentless judgment of a world that no longer sees her as the heroine, but as the betrayer. And the cruel truth is that in Hollywood, silence is never neutral. It is read as guilt. It is read as surrender. It is read as proof. And so the longer Blake hides, the more permanent her downfall becomes. The story twists tighter around her, and what was once a friendship story has now become a cautionary tale of power, envy, betrayal, and silence. And maybe that is why people cannot look away, because in the end, we are not just watching the crumbling of a bond. We are watching the crumbling of an image, an empire, a myth. And until the silence breaks, until words are spoken, until truth is revealed, the world will keep waiting, keep speculating, keep feeding the fire. Because in this arena of fame and fury, silence is never the end, it is only the beginning.